Sierra 117 to Infinity. Argent Moon scuttled. I've reassigned Blue Team. Destination Meridian. Potential contact from Cortana.
Negative 117. Another team is already being prepped to deal with her.
What the hell?
You're to return to Infinity immediately.
Negative Infinity. I don't like it.
The channel recently listed a few things we did and did not like about Paramount Plus's Halo Season 1. This was mostly a cursory look over the show and didn't go into a huge amount of detail over any individual topic. Not only that, but there were many other items we could have included on that list for both the good and bad side. As such, I wanted to analyze one thing in particular that I think the show was missing: other Spartans. Now, when I say that they were missing, I don't necessarily mean that I think there should have been a full squad of armored super soldiers, or even that the Spartans we did get should have been different characters. What I mean is that the Spartans in the show, not named John, really didn't add much to the narrative. Kai had a few nice moments with Miranda, but if you asked me what Vanek and Riz did, I could really only say that they were present. The show would have benefited from Spartans that were actual characters, that spoke to each other, had emotions and opinions that they shared with each other, even if they didn't share with non-Spartans. Or indeed especially that they didn't share with non-Spartans. It would have benefited from the familial dynamic given to us in the books and the games. Indeed, books like The Fall of Reach, First Strike, and Silent Storm use the connection these soldiers have to each other to enrich their stories and make the Chief and other Spartans seem more relatable to us as mortals. The show gave us a team of silent Spartans and a chatty Master Chief that has a stronger connection to a Covenant spy than to his brothers and sisters. In fact, Chief spends more on-screen time with non-Spartans than he does with Vanek, Kai, and Riz, and we think this was a real detriment to the show. I am your host, Jacob. Join us as we discuss why the Spartans should not have been silent and why Chief should have been. First, let's elaborate on the familial dynamic between the Spartans that we see in other media. Starting as far back as the Fall of Reach, we know that Spartans did their best to look out for each other during training. John shares some crackers with his teammates after failing a team challenge. All the kids beat up some Marines and steal a ship to ensure no one has to walk home on an exercise. There are dozens of other examples we could pull from the books to show how much they care for each other. We know from Halo First Strike that the Spartans even developed their own hand signals outside of the standard UNSC signs throughout their training, like the Spartan Smile. While that might seem trivial, these hand signals are a form of language, and a separate language or dialect is one of the things used to designate differences and identify entire cultures. So what this really means is that the Spartans are creating their own group culture and identity as they grow up and serve together. Part of that culture is a willingness to challenge and suggest their own ideas. We see in the book Silent Storm that Blue Team regularly questions Chief's orders, and were encouraged to do so. This is because they all respect each other. Chief even states he would be worried if they weren't challenging him to make sure the best idea wins in the situation. In the book Ghost of Onyx, Kurt 051 brings up an issue with Chief's plan of attack on an insurrectionist base after looking at some security footage and getting a bad feeling. Kurt couldn't even explain why he had the bad feeling, only that something didn't seem right to him. Rather than telling him to shut up and get in line, Chief gave Kurt permission to stay back and try and figure it out, because every Spartan had come to trust Kurt's intuition. And one consistent thread line throughout the entirety of the expanded material is that when the Spartans are not specifically separated for some reason, they are together. Eating together, training together, talking with each other. They are rarely found alone in the wild. Part of the reason for that is how comfortable they feel around each other. The vast majority of dialogue involving a Spartan in the books and comics is had with another Spartan. Going back to the Fall of Reach, there's a stark difference between when Spartans are talking with someone outside of their unit and when talking with each other, even Halsey. Their talk becomes much more concise and direct, and in the case of being in the presence of an officer, they only speak when spoken to, like most military enlisted men. Going back to Ghost of Onyx, it is expressly stated that Spartans were normally guarded and private, unless in the presence of other Spartans. So much so that they initially felt uncomfortable with Kurt 051, because he was unusually sociable with drill instructors and other non-Spartans. But if you haven't read the books or the comics, you can at least look to Halo 5 for examples of how Spartan 2 should be written. For all the bad that Halo 5's campaign was, at least Blue Team is treated like a team of professional soldiers that have been together for the majority of their lives. Or perhaps Locke and Buck put it best.
The members of Blue Team grew up together in the Spartan 2 program. They've registered more operations than any other fire team in the UNSC.
They're family.
Exactly.
Now, to be very clear about this, it isn't like if Chief were to go to Blue Team and say, "We are assassinating Lord Hood tomorrow." They would go along with it. That's just not what's going to happen. They aren't willing to turn traitor for their fellow Spartans, but going AWOL to support a mission, sanctioned or otherwise, that is personal to another, sure, they're good with that. This is the thing that the books, games, and comics get so right, and that the show was missing so badly. In the show, Spartans are rarely shown together outside of combat. Riz and Vanek have one scene where they are tooling with a Spartan laser schematic, and Chief finds them in the locker rooms together when Cortana introduces herself. But for the most part, they are almost always separate. In terms of screen time, Vanek spends more time outside of combat with birds, Riz spends more time getting a massage, and Kai spends more time with Miranda than they do together. And they spend practically no time with Chief, who shares more screen time with a Covenant spy in Season 1 than he does his brothers and sisters. That just shouldn't happen. In combat, they never seem to share ideas or speak with each other about the plan. And when they do question Chief in Season 2, he just shuts them down without giving any reasoning, in stark contrast to what you would get in the books. In fact, they rarely formulate a plan at all. They just go. There is precious little discussion between the Spartans at all in combat. Now, to be fair, there was much more of this in Season 2 during the Battle of Reach, which the show turned into an hour fight instead of the whole season, which it definitely should have been. Anyway, what there was better. There just still wasn't a lot of it. What there is a lot of is talking with Chief in both seasons. He is really chatty, actually. He talks a lot with Halsey. He talks a lot with Captain Keyes and Admiral Parangonsky. Talks a lot with Cortana. And God, does he talk a lot with Maquis. But he talks very little with his other Spartans. And outside of Kai, they barely speak at all, especially during Season 1. Riz and Vanek play the trope of silent protagonist much more than Chief does. What is a silent protagonist? I'm so glad you asked. Let me explain. The silent protagonist is a trope in video games in which a playable character doesn't speak much, if at all, throughout a story. Characters like Mario, Samus, and Link were the first silent protagonists, since most of the dialogue and exposition in their stories was given to us by other characters. It is worth noting here that Link does talk to other characters in his game, but the player never hears it. We just see short head nods while the characters in the game that Link is talking to appear to understand full sentences. This still makes him a silent protagonist, since the players cannot hear the dialogue and could fill in the blanks with any dialogue that makes sense to them. And that is the key feature of the trope. The reason why it was utilized for so long. Other than hardware or budget limitations, I mean. You see, in theory, if a character doesn't express themselves much or at all, then the player fills in what the character is thinking and feeling automatically. Essentially, the character is a blank slate that the player turns into a facsimile of themselves. And when they become a facsimile of the player becomes more emotionally connected to them and the story, because they are essentially stand-ins for what the player is thinking and feeling. The Master Chief was one such character when he was originally written. While some may disagree with me on this, if you didn't read the books, you didn't know Chief had a name or even a personality. His personality was that of the player. His name was a military rank that the player could have theoretically achieved. Beyond a handful of quippy lines and cutscenes, Chief never speaks. Instead, most of the dialogue is handled by Cortana, Spark, and Captain Keyes, with Johnson, Foehammer, and the Marines filling in the rest. This continues for Chief throughout the original series and for Noble 6 and Halo Reach. Only in the Forerunner trilogy does this change, with Chief having more lines and even fully fledged emotions in Halo 4, 5, and Infinite. In fact, I have numbers to back me up on this. Here are the total lines of dialogue Chief has in the first 3 games compared to that of Halo 4. Just to get my point across, here is a supercut of all of Chief's lines in Combat Evolved.
Captain Keyes, no thanks to your driving. Yes, I understand. Don't get any funny ideas. We'll be fine. You all right? So, what sort of weapon is it?
Let's stay focused. Halo, how do we use it against the Covenant? Slow down. You're losing me. Something buried. Keys? I don't understand. No, nothing. Cortana, hold on now. He's a friend. Yes. Activate Halo's defenses and destroy the Flood, which is why we brought the Index to the control center. Enough! The Flood is spreading. If we activate Halo's defenses, we can wipe them out. Is it true? Let's find a ride and get to the captain. You have a better idea? It tells me I'm not gonna like this. Do it. It'll hold. We'll make it. Where is he? How much firepower would you need to crack one of the engine shields? Did anyone else make it? No. I think we're just getting started.
This worked in the early games because of the aforementioned ability for players to project onto the character. It isn't just Chief that blew up Alpha Halo. It was you. It wasn't just Chief that needed a weapon. It was you. And it wasn't just Chief that finished the fight. It was you. This trope, though, never took off in television or cinema, because it was never a necessity. There weren't hardware limitations with movie cameras stopping characters from moving their mouths. But even more important, it would be challenging to have a silent protagonist without a story becoming narrative-driven instead of character-driven. What I mean by that is that the characters would just be moving from plot point to plot point without their own agency. They go somewhere to do something because the story needs them to go there and do that thing, not because it is something that the characters would normally do. Whereas with a character-driven narrative, the characters choose to go to that place and do that thing because it is in keeping with their goals or values. That's not to say that it would be impossible to have a silent protagonist drive a story forward. It would just be difficult since the character wouldn't be able to convey to the audience or supporting characters their view on things verbally. There is an additional risk with silent protagonists that they would just be flat. Body language can only convey so much personality. Ultimately, some form of complex communication is necessary. This would be particularly devastating to a show if that protagonist was their main character, like Chief is in Paramount's Halo. However, I would prefer a flat character over one that writers cannot choose to make stoic or angsty. This is a big problem with the writing of Master Cheeks in the Paramount show. Some episodes, he's a stoic warrior like we are accustomed to. He calmly does battle against the alien masses and reassures his allies. But in other episodes, he's like a moody teenager who has been listening to too much My Chemical Romance.
I'm gonna tell your mom.
They wouldn't understand anyway.
I'm gonna tell your mom.
They wouldn't get me.
She's gonna ground
All right?
you all.
This ain't a phase.
No, even when Chief was given more lines and personality in the games, it was done with a less is more approach. That is what I would have recommended for this show. But how can you give fewer lines to your main character without making them flat and boring? Again, I'm so glad you asked. For my money, the Spartans should have been written as a team instead of as a group of individuals. Now, I don't mean that they should have been carbon copies of each other with no distinguishing characteristics or personality traits. Rather, when drafting the script, the writers should have considered scenes in which they were together as the standard. 70 to 75% of Chief's screen time should have been spent with other Spartans. All of the other Spartans. This allows them to interact with each other regularly, bringing out the best in each other, allowing them dialogue that other characters shouldn't hear, and, most importantly, allowing Chief to be a leader of warriors instead of an angsty teenager in a 45-year-old's body. Although, admittedly, it is a good-looking body. I would argue that Chief should have been written as a stoic, introverted leader who considered the opinions of his fellow Spartans and then decided on a course of action. That way, when in combat, the other Spartans can voice their misgivings about a situation, without sounding like moody rebels, and Chief can then step in and give direction based on their dialogue. This is something that would have been much more in line with the character in the games, which would have helped get longtime fans of the IP on your side. When out of combat, they can be a little more frank with each other, and, dare I say, even jovial. Then we would get to see the more human side of the professional super soldiers that can really endear them to an audience of both old and new fans. Especially if they were coming off a scene in which Chief was separated from the Spartans. Since this show was so comfortable putting the Spartans in civilian settings, I propose this possibility. Chief is invited by the higher-ups to attend some type of social gathering for propaganda or political purposes. He hobnobs with admirals and socialites all night trying to be pleasant, but clearly not feeling comfortable. Then he returns to his Spartans as soon as he can to ditch his Navy Whites and get back in BDU. The Spartans jest with him about the fancy party, and he gets to be annoyed but relieved to be back with his brothers and sisters, and then they share some dialogue about their last mission, or what is coming next, or whatever. This could have shown us so much about him as a character. He is not accustomed to social settings, but remains professional anyway. He feels at home in a military barracks. And most importantly, the Spartans make each other feel comfortable. The Spartans feel like a family. And with that familial feeling, the other Spartans could have felt like actual characters instead of just walking, talking plot devices. As I said in the last video, I really enjoyed Kai's character. I thought she was a fun addition to the show's non-combat scenes. That could not be said for Vanek or Riz, who seemed to specifically reinforce the fears of silent protagonists coming off as flat and uninteresting. It isn't until season 2 that they actually get some development to them. And frankly, it is far too little and too late. What I mean by that is that the show wanted us to feel these emotional connections to them dying or retiring. They wanted us to feel Chief's shock and horror at seeing his brother dying in front of him. The problem is, they never share any screen time that is just the two of them. They never have a heart-to-heart. They never feel like brothers. Riz is similar. The show wants us to connect with her decision on this emotional level. But the only work they did to build to it was show her getting a massage and sleeping on her friend's couch. It wants these moments to be devastating, but it doesn't want to lay the proper foundation and development for them. It wants a huge emotional payoff, but it doesn't want to do the hard work necessary to deserve it. But if we had gotten to see the Spartans together more, if all of the Spartans had actually been developed properly, we might have actually seen them as the family they should have been. And then maybe, just maybe, Vanek and Riz's removals would have been worth something. In conclusion, the books, games, comic books, and even animated adaptations give us plenty of examples of the Spartans feeling like a family. When they are apart, they feel uncomfortable. When they are together, they feel at ease. And this facet of the characters has not felt present in the first 2 seasons of Paramount Plus's show. Instead, the show gave us a Master Chief that is very chatty with everyone but his fellow Spartans, and other Spartans who remained mostly silent. If anything, that should have been the other way round, and they should have been on screen together more often than apart. Had they spent the time necessary to build all of these characters up correctly and develop a familial relationship with them, then Chief could have seemed much more like his video game counterpart, and the audience would have felt more endeared to the other Spartans. And had the audience cared more about Vanek and Riz, then their big emotional moments might have actually landed. But that is just our opinion, and we want to hear yours in the comments section below. If you can appreciate the hard work that went into this video, then please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. I've been your host, Jacob. Thank you guys for spending time with us tonight, and I will see you in the next one.
I love this plan.
I love it too.
All right, here we go.
John, if we miss...
We won't.